Hello and welcome to the Modern Fairy Sightings Podcast, where we listen to people's fairy encounters. But take heed, we're not talking about winged Tinkerbells here. These are real fairies, real encounters that took people like you and I by surprise. Stay a while and hear their stories. My name is Jo Hickey Hall, and I'm a folklore researcher. Hello dear listener, it's some time since I released an episode, so I'm delighted to be back with you again and to be able to share these stories with you. Many of you know that I'm currently writing a book, and lately I had been taking some time to focus on that, but also continuing with interviews, which I'll now be releasing. This podcast is very much an organically growing DIY project, which I create by myself at home. I don't have a creative team, so like anything else in life, when you also have a family, it's quite a juggle, but I am immensely grateful that I can continue to do what I love. This is my full-time job now, and it's only possible for me to continue creating it because of the amazing people who support me. Thank you to each and every person who has placed their faith in me and this project and joined my Patreon. I'm very grateful. If you can support the show by joining us, please do. Over the last 4 weeks, I've been releasing some bonus content which relates to the previous episode, Experiencing the Wee Folk in Ireland. We took a look at traditions and beliefs around milk churning in Ireland, and last week I shared a bonus which featured other audio experiences, childlike voices and laughter which had an otherworldly quality. All of this information aids our understanding, and the most valuable aspect is our warm, supportive community. Dear listener, over the past 4 weeks, we've also seen a surge in the devastating situation. As I've said before many times, it is unbearable to witness. But what I am noticing is that people who felt unable to express their horror and grief previously are now joining others and standing up to injustice. There's a distinct impression that folk are starting to realise that what we're fed by our governments and mainstream media does not resonate with our own felt experiences. Propaganda not only perverts the facts and detracts from the truth, but is designed to psychologically override the viewer's sense of what is right. But in witnessing these attacks, many more are now waking up to the illusion. We may also be recognising that this is the same playbook which has been engaged in numerous other situations through the ages. We have been separated from what is right, what our divine human rights are, and what is true for us as human beings. We have long been fed ideas which have led to a sense of division and separation from each other, from ourselves, and from the divine. At this time, the scales are falling from our eyes, and systematic corruption is suddenly in plain view. Without doubt, in the realization of this truth, this is a pivotal point in our history, in the development of humankind. Do not lose hope. The forces of rage and love within you are valid and needed. They demand justice for each other and for our planet. It is driving change, not by seeking permission through corrupted structures and leaders gripped by corporatism and the industrial military complex. We take it for ourselves, on our own terms, by aligning with our brothers and sisters, standing by our own values, maintaining the interconnection of our communities, and defending against division of all kinds. In these darkest of times, the light is growing much stronger, and as long as we hold on to our truth, this enlightenment can no longer be restrained. It pours out and it reaches a hand to those in suffering. In most of the experiences that I discuss with my guests, they meet some aspect of the divine, often at points in their lives when they are faced with transition. This is our time of transition, and the divine is within you, the part of you that tells you there is another way for you to be living. In our personal lives, we can sense the threshold close, like a membrane which we push against, and just like a human birth, we feel the contractions disturbing us, compelling us, dispelling us from one place of existence into something new, something unknown. If we let go and trust our deepest instincts, the change will come naturally, but not without difficulty and challenges. But as we learned when each of us were first born, we can move through this and emerge into another world where we are welcomed with love. In this episode, we hear from a woman from Greater Manchester who, as a child, came into contact with small black creatures that emerged from her chimney. Though her attempts to discuss these experiences were suppressed as a child, her family seems to have had a history of encounters with the other world. In the full-length episode, accessible to members of the Curious Crew on Patreon, we hear about her more recent traumatic experience with a hat man and the timely appearance of a small-sized being on her windowsill. I do hope you enjoy listening. Huge thanks to our guest. I will be back at the end for a quick chat. Time to
My mum was older when she had me. She was like 40s, and I was the last one. Like 11, 12 when I was born.
Yeah.
And then I appeared. Back when my mum, she never told me this until she was, I'd say, in the 50s. I was a teenager before she told me. She actually saw, she called it, she didn't say a gnome, she said a little man. She was walking home from the library. She said I wasn't thinking about anything at all, and it was a quiet road because it was back in, well, it'd probably be wartime, about 1942, I'd say. She was walking home from the library, and she said she just glanced down, and from the hedge, a little man jumped out in front of her. She said, and then he jumped back in straight away. She said she was that startled. She didn't actually think anything. She just thought, what would I have seen? What have I seen? And she went home and she said to her mum, I've seen a little man. And her mum said, oh, have you? She just laid back, oh, have you? She said, no, I've seen a really little man. She said he was about 10, 12 inches tall. She said he was dressed in muted coloured clothes, like a greeny brown colour. And I asked her, I remember asking her, I said, did you wear a hat, Mum? Did it wear a hat, Mum? And she said, no. She said it didn't wear a hat. She said it was just a little man who jumped out and then jumped back into the hedge and vanished. She said she didn't have time to think of anything. She was just shocked. Growing up, she never actually told me about that man, that little man, what she saw, and which I thought was a bit odd. I used to smell cigar smoke. This is growing up. And I used to say, why is that room full of smoke? And she used to say, no, it isn't. There's nothing there. And then I can remember her saying to me, don't talk about it. It's just people will think you're bonkers. And I think that's what people have said to her. Don't talk about it. People will think you're bonkers if you're saying, I've seen a little man jump out of a hedge. It's not a normal thing to say, is it? Or a normal thing to think about. Even then. I mean, even now people think, fairy bonkers. But she didn't actually say it was a fairy. She just said it was a little man. My grandfather, her dad, was very, very religious. He wouldn't even allow a pack of cards in the house. He was that religious. And he was very strict. And I think she had to stop talking about it or mentioning it. She didn't. I used to see all sorts of things when I was little. I used to see the house before, the people before us, he died of lung cancer. And he used to smoke a lot. And I used to say to my mum, why is there, I didn't know this, by the way. I used to say, why is there smoke in the back room? No, there's no smoke. I said, I can see smoke. I can smell it. No, you can't. No, you can't. And I only found out much later on she'd seen it as well. But she didn't want me to say it because she said, don't tell anybody. It's just people think you're daft. People think you're bonkers. Keep quiet about it. Don't talk about it. I can remember a weird incident, and I was walking with my mum. We got I had a pony when I was about 13, and I was walking back from the stables. We were actually parallel, weirdly enough, 2 fields over from where she saw that little man jump out. But we was in the fields rather than on the road. And we was walking along, and I said, Mum, what's that over there? And in the field, there was a strange light coloured shape, almost a figure shape, and it kept pace with us for 300 or 400 yards. And I kept saying, Mum, that thing's following us. What is it? And she said, I don't know. Don't look at it. Just keep walking. And she kept walking faster and faster. And I said, I was slowing down. I kept saying, yeah, but what is it? What is it? I want to know what it is. No, keep walking. Ignore it. You don't see it. Just ignore it. And that's where she dealt with anything. You don't see it. So growing up, I didn't really think about fairies or anything. I didn't have any like preconceived ideas apart from they had little wings and they looked like Tinkerbell. That was the only thing about fairies I ever thought about. And I can remember this experience. You were talking about something to Erie, Essex, and it brought it back. And I never thought about it for, God, years, decades. I'd always put it down as, at the time, and parents had said, you're dreaming, you're dreaming, you're dreaming. So I thought, oh, I must be. Anyway, when I was about 4, it was before I started school. It was definitely before I started school. And this was early 70s, probably about 73-ish. And for some reason, my parents used to put me into their bed. I've not got a clue why, because I know I had a cot and then I had a bed afterwards. Now, I think I might have outgrown it. They used to put me in their bed, which was in this big back bedroom. And it was directly facing a chimney breast. And the chimney breast was coated in, the wallpaper back in the 70s, 60s, 70s. It was like some psychedelic weird thing. So I never liked that wallpaper anyway. But I used to lie there and I'd be staring at the wallpaper because it was 8 o'clock. You'd put me to bed at 8 o'clock. I was only a kid, so they put me to bed at 8. And it was light because it was summer, because I know that it was summer and it wasn't dark. So it would be light in the room. Even though we had curtains on, it was light in the room. And I'd be in bed and I'd be waiting. And I'd not sleep for ages, and I hated going to bed. My brother and sister would be out, they'd be playing on the fields at the back. So there'd just be my mum and dad downstairs. And I can remember one night I was put into bed and I lay there, and I know my mum went downstairs and she was chatting. I could hear the television on downstairs, and it was a nice summer night and kids were playing out in the fields. And then I can remember this, it's like a sequence what happened every night. The only way I can describe it is the world held its breath. That's thinking back. It's the only way I can describe it. It sort of, the atmosphere went really tight in the room and very, very odd. It's like you couldn't hear anything. And it just felt odd. The atmosphere felt weird. And then I had like a grating sound. It was like a stone dragging across another stone. That's the only way I can describe it. And it came from the chimney breast. And then I can't remember because it was like a long time ago. I can't remember exactly what happened, but I can remember looking at the chimney breast and where the wallpaper was and where the wall would be behind had like faded away. And it was deeper. When I was looking into it, it was deeper. I want to say it was darker, slightly darker in there, but I'm not sure if it was or not. It was definitely a hollow cavey type, looking into a cavey type place. And there was things looking back at me. And when I was a kid, I didn't have a word for it. I still don't have a word for what they were. They were like 12 inches, 10, 12 inches tall, I'd say. Thinking back, this is thinking back. There were these things. I called them puppets. I used to call them the puppets are coming for me. And I said they were puppets because that's the only word I could explain what they were like. I looked in and there was these things staring back at me. I'm trying to think. There was always more than two. I wouldn't say more than about 5 or 6, but there was always more than two. There was one that was always there, always there. There was another one which was there most of the time, which had a long nose. That's the only way I can describe it. It had a long nose. They didn't look anything like gnomes, Joe. They didn't look anything like fairies. And this is why I never thought they were fairies or fae or anything. They looked dirty, is in a way I can describe them. They looked hairy. They had big round eyes. They were squat in appearance. Heads were large for the bodies. I want to say they had shaggy hair, but they might not have done. They might have worn some clothing, shaggy clothing. I don't know. They did wear weird things, like sometimes they'd have a cloak on or a bit of thing wrapped around them. I can remember that very clearly. I can remember looking at them and they were dirty. And at first I looked at these, and first I can remember dead clearly the first time it happened. And I looked at them and I thought they were looking back and staring over, like as if they were peering through a window, is the only way I can describe it. They were peering through something at me. And I thought, oh, I don't need to go to bed. There's like puppets. That's how I thought about them. There's puppets. And then they started pointing. And then they'd pull these grotesque, really horrible faces at me. Then they'd like dance around and peer at me and laugh amongst each other. They were laughing. Like I say, these faces were pulling, and I was getting scared. And I can remember the feeling, the terror. I was really scared then, and I'd not been scared up to then until they started these weird antics. But that spent a while doing that, pointing and like laughing, is the only way I can describe what they were doing. And then one of them would look over. Now, the only way I can think of it, say it, is like, baby language. One would go, point at me and say, "Idle." And then there's one would say, "Riddle, little, riddle, riddle, riddle." And they keep singing that. And then they turned it into a song. And that really scared me, because I thought, when that song finishes, they're going to come and get me. And that's what was in my head. By that point, I was underneath the covers. I was absolutely shaking and terrified and underneath the covers and crying. That was the first time I saw them.
Utterly terrifying. I mean, that the whole thing is so unsettling. The one that you felt like he was the leader, because I know you sent me a couple of pictures, and one of them was...
I can't draw him. I cannot. I've tried to think what he was like. Sometimes I think muzzles, and sometimes I think, no, they look more human. Their eyes was rounder, bigger, darker. That the one that I showed George with a long nose. I can remember that because its nose was long. You know, when you're little and something weird would stick in your mind. That's why I remember that. I find it very hard to try and concentrate and remember what they look like, because I didn't just see them once. They came back night after night after night for, well, I want to say weeks. I'd say it was the summer before I started school. So roughly 4-ish.
And did you have any strange dreams around that time?
No. It was very strange as well, Joe, because I saw those things night after night after night. I kept telling my mum, I kept telling my dad, and they kept saying, "You're dreaming. You're dreaming. It'll go. It's only a bad dream. Don't worry about it." But all I kept saying was, "There's puppets in the wall trying to get me." And that's all I kept saying, because I didn't have the words. I was too young to describe what I was seeing. I still, all this time later, I mean, I'd still probably have a hard time explaining what I was seeing. But this, like I say, it went on for weeks. It got to the stage where every time it was bedtime, I started screaming and crying because I was that scared of them. I always thought when they finished singing that song, because they'd make us, like I say, a weird song up about me. It was about me. And I always thought they were going to kill me at the end or drag me off somewhere. I don't know. I just had that. I was that terrified, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I used to hide underneath the covers. And one day my mum, I didn't hear her come up, and she came up and she got me from because she said, "What are you doing under the covers? You're boiling hot. What are you doing? Why are you crying?" I said, "Those things were in my room." And I can remember looking over at the chimney breast, and she said, "There's nothing there. There's nothing there." And I said, "I'm scared they'll come back." So she used to say, "I'll leave the landing light on." I mean, it was light, but she used to leave the light on for me. She said, "You can just get out of bed and run out, run out the door." But I would have been too scared to do that. What was strange though, I never saw them come out the wall, and I always fell asleep, which was really weird, I think, uh, before that song ended. They'd be singing and they'd like do a weird dance and start singing. Well, I'd go under the covers at that point, so I don't know any further what they were doing. Would I get under the covers and then I'd fall asleep? And I thought for ages, and I thought, why did I fall asleep? And then I did a little bit of research, and it said they can affect you with the songs. I don't know if that's true, if you've heard that.
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, it's part of, slipping into an altered state, the repetitive song. And, it's a chant, isn't it? It's something that will lull you. I mean, that's what, effectively, the other end of the spectrum, that's what lullabies are for too. It's this sort of, repetitive song that will lull you. And it can, chants are extremely powerful. I find they're one of the most powerful forms of ritual that you can use to affect.
When they were singing, when they first the voices, the beginning was it would be something like "it'll," would be the voice, at the beginning. And when they started singing, it started going higher and higher and higher pitched. And it was like at the end, it sounded like insects. I can remember. It sounded like insects. Is the only way I can describe it. It was so high pitched and fast. We couldn't sing as fast as they could, or as high pitched.
Wow. Yeah. I'm thinking about the fact that you were falling asleep to that. And I'm just wondering what happened in your dream state.
I don't know. I don't think it was anything. Well, I don't think it was anything bad. Like I said, I do remember waking up, and I woke up more than once actually. But once I woke up and I did hear them under the bed. But I looked over and I couldn't see the chimney. I remember looking over and the chimney just looked like a chimney. But I think it had gone darker then. And then I did definitely heard one. And I used to wait and listen and try and listen to see if it was them again. Don't know what was doing that, moving the bed.
The bed, was that your parents' bed or was that your...
No, it was my parents. It was a big bed. It was a big bed. So it would have been very heavy.
Yeah.
It was, because it was a very old bed as well, because my parents collected antiques and they liked old furniture and things. So I think that would have been an old bed.
I mean, it's just making me think of one particular man that contacted me once and said he was having a terrible time. And there were these small black creatures that were rocking his bed. And I've also heard from a couple of people that were over in the US. This was right at the start of my collecting stories. And they were having this small black furry creature that was terrorizing them in their bedrooms at night, and they would run under the bed and disappear. And they really had no way of controlling what was happening. That kind of phenomena is very much akin to what we experience with poltergeists too, the kind of lifting of beds, troublesome spirits. I'm just so sorry that your parents didn't really understand what was going on for you as well, because that's just terrifying. I mean, you can't sort of judge them for that, because, it would be hard for them to get their heads around. And it's so frustrating because this sort of thing happens a lot, especially with children around their age. And it is just so frustrating that for some reason our culture has decided that this doesn't happen, even though most of us said, well, actually, I experienced something like this. And so do other people that I know. What is it that we've got such a hang up about? These are our experiences. Why is it so weird to talk about these things that happen to people? It's real. It happens. Like any other thing that happens to people. Why have we been culturally muzzled?
It's unacceptable. I didn't even think of them as fairies. Even now, I call things the other crowd, because I think there's that many different parts of creature and nature what we don't know about. So I prefer saying it's the Irish call it the other crowd, don't they? They didn't look anything. I mean, somebody said to me when I was a kid, fairies are dirty. They look like they've never had a wash or had their hair combed. You wouldn't think that. You'd think a little sparkly little fairy, don't you? It's even to me, I keep thinking, what were they? What were they? There was something, definitely something. But what were they?
And it's interesting, isn't it, that they were coming, because that was a chimney breast, and chimneys, fireplaces, hearths, these are places, they are liminal places, because it's between, it's an entrance point or an exit point. And these are places that we end up finding witch marks and various items of protection, charms to protect the household. They're often found in chimney breasts, and items on the hearth. So that, I think, is very interesting. And when you did sleep, how was that? Did you sleep well? Can you connect?
I can remember. I can remember. And I didn't even think about it. I was thinking about, because one little memory's triggering more and more and more. But I can remember after they'd been, and I can remember looking across at the chimney and it didn't look any different. I can remember waking up after they'd been, you know what I mean? And I looked over at the chimney, and then I heard them underneath the bed.
Oh.
I heard one of the voices underneath the bed, and I heard it sound as if one had fell, like a funny noise, like something had tripped or something.
Yeah.
And I can remember lying in bed very still. And then next thing, the bed lifted. It lifted at one side and then the other, on one side and then the other. But it wasn't a gentle rocking. This was as if something was giving you a death ride, if you know what I mean. It was proper rocking. I can remember as a child, my grip. You've got your mattress underneath your bed, and I can remember holding on either side of my body so I didn't fall out of the bed, because I was scared I was going to fall out. And they were jacking me around like that. And I can remember that going on a few times. You can remember sometimes it wasn't as violent rocking, and it was more gentle rocking. I can remember that. I actually told my husband about it, and I told him about how terrified they made me. And I'd only recently told him about it, and he said to me, "Do you not think they'd come to play with you?" And I said, "Well, they weren't doing a good job because I was terrified. They were pulling the faces." And he said, "Yeah, but this is what kids do, isn't it? To little children,
Right, to each other.
Yeah, like the pull faces each other." And he said, maybe when they were doing that singing, maybe they were trying to put you to sleep and be nice with you. Maybe when they was rocking that bed, they were rocking the bed because they thought, this is what you do. You rock, you rock children to sleep. Mm-hmm. And I thought, well, they never actually hurt me. They only scared me with the presence. So maybe he was onto something.
Okay, but yeah, I mean, I guess it's how you felt. What did their eyes seem to be portray to you?
Mischief. When I looked at them, that's what I saw. Mischief, really.
Mm. And it's interesting also that they were dirty, because I know when you wrote to me, you mentioned that there were mine shafts near the house. And also,
Yeah.
just while we're on the house, wasn't it between two reservoirs and on a crossroads?
It was. There used to be one of the very first, well, colliery, a colliery,
Yeah.
before they did passenger railways, a colliery railway ran along the side of the house. That was like on the old maps, and that's like 1800, that type of era. It had long gone by the time the house had gone, but there was mine shafts all along it. And I kept thinking, when I've tried to look at things, what they could be, there's something called knockers.
Yeah.
And they're known for pulling grotesque faces and doing weird dances if miners saw them.
Yeah, it's a very good point, that they could be what miners knew very well as knockers, who could be a bit mischievous, but also could warn miners when there was, when they were in danger, either by
Yeah.
gases or by the falling, roofs of the shafts, that they would knock on the wall and warn the miners to get the hell out of there. And in return, particularly down in Cornwall, of course, where the knockers, they were known as the knockers, the miners would leave the crust of their pasty for them. They would leave these offerings for the knockers in gratitude, and as a kind of keep me safe type offering, a bit of a bargaining kind of deal going on between the miners and the knockers. So yeah, I mean, that is one possibility. And of course, we're, as always, we're sort of putting names on and categories on these, otherworldly beings that it's fairly impossible to pin it down, isn't it? But one thing I was thinking of was they sound a bit like imps, which are, and again, you can't really get a clear-cut definition of what imps are, but they're kind of small, usually very dark, mischievous, terrorizing young children or playing tricks on people. They're very prankish imps.
Yeah.
And so, that kind of immediately, when I was thinking about your experiences, I thought of imps. So the one that was, kind of like a leader, there was another being that you drew, that you sent, that didn't have the long nose. But he kind of had, like, it was as if he was baring his teeth almost.
Yeah.
Do you remember?
That's
What
I tried to draw right. I really tried to remember and draw, but I couldn't get him right.
Okay.
I know the head was right, because he had that strange shaped heavy head with not much neck.
Yeah.
Stocky body. Clothing, I think the clothing was just something what they put on because they liked it. I don't think they actually wore it, but I might be wrong. That hairy body could be rabbit skin. I don't know. I can't remember. I would like to circle, but I can't remember that.
Mm.
And when you try to remember the faces, it slides away. And yet I can remember other things very, very clearly.
Yeah.
Extremely clearly. How I felt, the song, what they sang, strange songs, the voices going high pitched. But the faces, I keep thinking animalistic in a way.
Mm-hmm.
But it slides out of my head. It's like I can't, especially the ringleader, I can't keep his face in my mind. It just slides away.
And what was he kind of doing at the time that made it feel like he was a ringleader? Because this kind of comes up, it's come up a few times now with people who encounter a group of fairies, that there often is this ringleader. Can you remember anything about his actions or his presence?
He was the one, yeah, he was the one at the beginning he seemed to be at the front. He seemed to be the one who'd start the singing.
Right.
He'd start the singing off. And then the other ones, they went into like, it was almost ecstasy when they started singing. It was so intense with them. It was like a thing what they had to do. They couldn't, how can I put it? Like an animal, how it gets excited. It was like that. And they can't stop themselves. It was very primitive, as the way I can describe it, and intense. And the singing meant a lot to them, I think. It sounds, I felt it sounds silly saying it. I think I sound silly in saying it. But I think singing is like the main part of their life. Now, probably they did the magic. I don't know. I'm saying magic, but probably to them, it's just how they moved from one place to another. I don't know.
Yeah.
I've got different thoughts, but.
Yeah. It definitely feels like that was some kind of power or force that was important to them and was clearly an important tool or means of communing or again I'm trying not to label them in a way, but the kind of the wielding of power over you, and it certainly did wield power over you because it made you frightened. But what happened? What was the process when they started singing? Do you remember kind of how that felt to you and how that would affect you and your body at the time? Would that just send you into waves of fear, or was something else going on?
It was proper dread. Something was going to go on. I was dreading it. I was absolutely terrified. I'd slide under the covers. I'd be crying. I'd be shaking. And I could still hear them. And I thought, it's going to go. They're going to get me. When that song finishes, I always thought they were going to come for me and take me away or do something. Or I don't know. I mean, they didn't, as far as I know. They didn't, as far as I know. So maybe they were just trying to entertain themselves with me. I don't know.
Mm. So sorry that you went through that, because it does sound really distressing.
No, I don't really want to include this, Jo, because I did tell you, and it sounds weird to me. And for years I thought, is this some sort of a ghost? But I can remember one night, and they were really going for it, singing, pointing at me. And I can remember lying in bed. I think I was too scared to move at the time. And then someone came up behind them, but he didn't look anything like them. He looked more human. And I can remember him walking from the left-hand side of them behind them. And when he was coming towards them, they all most of them fell silent when they saw him. The ones at the front were still singing and pointing. And I couldn't hear what he said. But I can remember looking at him and I thought, he's going to stop them from singing and upsetting and making me cry. And I remember the one at the front must have been doing something. And then he must have stopped and they must have seen him, because they all went quiet. All those things went quiet. And they looked at him and he must have said to them, "What are you doing?" And I can remember as clear as anything. And they all pointed at me. It was, lying in bed. And they pointed at me. And he sort of peered as if he was peering through something like a window. That's the only thing I can describe. He peered down, saw me, and I thought, he's going to say something now and he's going to stop these creatures. Because he looked human. You know what I mean? I just thought, he's human. He'll tell them to stop. And he looked at me and he just laughed. He just laughed at me and turned around and walked off. And I only saw a glimpse of him once afterwards. But he never mocked me, belittled me, sang anything. He just walked away. Those things were scared of him. I know that. I don't know what he was, who he was, whether he was a ghost. I don't know. He didn't look like a ghost. He looked like a person.
Goodness me. So he was kind of normal height, and what did he look like?
You'd pass him in the street. I can't, because I was so young, I can't say I can't give you a detailed description. He was, if you were looking at him, you'd say in his 30s. It might have been, I don't know how old he was, but that's, you see, you'd be like an adult when you're 4, don't you? You look old. He didn't look like an old man. He didn't look like a teenager, because I would have known the difference.
Yeah.
He looked human. He just, the way I can say, he looked human. And he actually came over to see what they were doing and what they were shouting and singing and pointing at, and then laughed as if like to say, oh, just carry on then.
Yeah. It's horrible.
Because I just thought he was human. He looked human. He had probably paler skin than a human, if I had to think about it, but nothing like, you'd walk past him in the supermarket, that type of face. And that was as clear as anything. And I think I only saw a glimpse of him once. And he was just looked over me in that bed when I was lying in the bedroom when they were all singing. And that was it. Never saw him again.
What was he wearing?
It was, I can't remember. He was like behind them. You know, say if you looked at something and it was like in a hollow.
Yeah,
it was like looking into it. I imagine it being dark and rocks or whatever. I imagine them being in a cave. If I think about it, I imagine them being in a cave.
Mm.
And it was just an ordinary top. I mean, I couldn't see the bottom half of him because it was like only the top half of the chimney breast changed. The bottom half still looked like a chimney, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I did actually speak to a lady who was only very recently, I think I told you, a couple of weeks back. Mm. And I did mention this because I never spoke to anybody about this properly, apart from you, I think, at the beginning.
Yeah.
And she said to me, your mum knew what was going on and she stopped it for you. I don't know if that's right. But I thought that's quite interesting because they suddenly stopped appearing, just completely nothing.
But didn't they open up the chimney breast?
They did, because you always ask your guests, did anything happen around that time? Mm. Well, around that time when they was appearing, my parents won the pools. Oh. They didn't win millions, but they won a little bit, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So they had alterations done in the house and the chimney breast came out.
That's so interesting, isn't it? That I mean, if you kind of relate fairies to treasure and all the rest of it, I think that's quite interesting. That
I hadn't thought about it until recently, and then I thought, you always ask your guests, did anything happen around that time or afterwards? They won the pools. Not a massive amount, just a few thousand, but back then they had enough to like do the house up, you know, and pay the house off or whatever.
Yeah. Goodness me, that's really interesting. And this was on the lead up to you going to primary school as well.
Yeah,
so that's a big shift for you too. It is making me think again about the mining shafts and even the kind of cave, the sense of being in a cave. I mean, to a child, they wouldn't know what a mining shaft was. I'm wondering if that kind of background that they were in was in fact something like a mining tunnel or shaft, and whether this man could have potentially died nearby if he was a spirit. I mean, the fairies and the deceased do crop up together. It's throughout the folklore, it's throughout encounters that people have reported seeing fairies with their deceased loved ones in lots of different situations, or deceased that they, people that they knew in the community. And I'm just wondering, especially with maybe he had maybe a paler complexion, whether it's possible, and anything is possible because we just don't know. But it is making me wonder whether he was somebody that lost their lives in the mines, and if these beings were related in some way to, because it's the underworld, isn't it? It's literally under the earth. It's these dark places, and fairies are they very regularly crop up in places where there is access to underground tunnels, including old mines, old disused mines and tunnels. So, yeah, but the good thing is that when the chimney breast was removed, they went with it. And I'd love to know, and of course you wouldn't know now because it's so many years ago, but what the builder revealed when they did that work, and whether anything.
I can remember, Jo, because I remember being taken up. Can't remember if we must have slept in a different room when that chimney's breast was out, but I can remember looking at it and thinking, oh, it didn't go very far back. I thought it would go quite a long way, because of what I'd seen.
Yeah.
And I remember looking at it and thinking, oh, it's only small. It stuck in my brain, that little, oh, it's only small. For some reason, I expected like a tunnel.
What about your older brother and sister? Was it a brother and sister?
Yeah. And they've never. No, I asked my brother. My sister, if one jumped out and landed on her head, she wouldn't say it. You know what I mean? She's just very much of this world, we'll say. My brother, he'd probably be the one who'd seen things. And I asked him, and I said, did you hear anything or see anything? He said, no, never. And then he said, I did hear some funny knocking in the chimney.
Oh.
He said, but it stopped when I was about 10. He says, I never heard it again.
Oh.
But that's all he said. He said he'd never heard anything, just some like knocking in the chimney.
And was that because they had a chimney breast in their bedroom too, or was that when he was in your parents' room?
No, it was in his, there was another chimney breast in his bedroom, which went down to the kitchen because his was over the kitchen.
Right.
And they all got took out.
Yeah. And what about yours? Did that go down to the lounge?
It did. Yeah, it went down to the lounge. Well, there wouldn't have been a fire then because it was summer. So, like I say, it was very odd. A lot of really weird things. And those things I would never even associate as a fairy or fae. They look more like elemental type things if you think about element. That's what I think of, like in nature. What nature would look like, something dirty and not sparkly. Do you know what I mean, Jo?
Yeah, I mean, nature isn't sparkly. Nature, usually you might catch a beautiful dewdrops on a rose and think, oh, wow. And you see this sort of divine and heavenly beauty of that. But, nature isn't pristine, and they come in all different forms. They really do. This is why it's very hard to sort of pin them down.
I call them the hairy fairies.
Hairy fairies, yeah. Love that. Your house, this sounds like it's a very rural area. It's very unspoilt. Is that right?
It's like in between two places, if you know what I mean. You only have a ribbon road going out of somewhere. It's a main road. So it was busy even then. There's fields at the back and fields like at the front. There's a row of houses and then fields. Directly facing, there's an old track, like a farm track, which goes down to the farms. And it actually goes down to a hall which was built in about 1500, which is probably about 3/4 of a mile away from the house.
I mean, that as well, but the idea that it's between two places is also very liminal. places between, if you think about other liminal spaces, it might be on the edge of a city or, just inside the countryside, these kinds of places. So the fact that it's on a road from one place to another is significant too. Did you ever plot any old maps over the house? And
I have done, but it doesn't show anything.
right.
It doesn't show anything at all. I've looked, and supposing there's a lot of mines, the old mines, probably very old mines, like 1600s. When I've looked into it, they actually mined the area, and that area was mined first because the coal seam is higher near the surface, right? And then so that they could access it. And then as centuries went by, they had to dig it deeper and deeper. So they moved away from that area. So those would be probably the bell mines, wouldn't they? Which would be about 1600, 17, I don't know. I'm not really well up on mining. It's just bits what I've picked up.
That's really interesting. So it's quite old. It's quite a long history of mining in the area.
I know the actual colliery railway, what they had, and it was something to do with the hall in, because that's how they got the money. It was one of the first railways in the country. One of the first engines.
Gosh, yeah.
That's what ran past the house, and you used to see the tracks.
Railways are hotspots, major hotspots. People see ghosts, cryptids, fairies, you name it. Black dogs, always around rail tracks. I don't know if it's something to do with the flow through the landscape, that like repetitive flow, or whether it disrupts something in the landscape. I just don't know. But they are often hotspots. So in the story of the green gnome that climbed in through the little boy's window, there was a train track close by there where somebody else in that encounter saw a being. Yeah,
yes, I remember. Yeah,
yes. They really do. So that could have a bearing on it. And of course, there's the reservoirs as well.
Yeah,
the water is.
Yeah, and there's always been a stream there, and that used to be the mill, which belonged to my ancestors.
And how wonderful to be living in that place that your ancestors lived. I think that is so precious, and very few people can say that nowadays, in fact. And I really love that idea, and I think that's really amazing that you had that link there with your ancestral line.
Yeah. Which is not, it was literally across the field at the back where the mill was. When I used to ride my horse down the tracks across, and you could see all the old stones from the very old railway.
Oh, amazing. What a lovely childhood to be off on your pony and being able to go off and play in the fields. Oh, I love that idea.
Yeah, well, it was, we had I had a lot of freedom as a child, lots of freedom, to run with, we all ran wild, with the kids and that. There was an Irish family that would live near. It was quite big, and they had lots of children. I was always around there. Yeah. It was wonderful.
Sort of years later, when I remember you mentioned that you went on holiday and your mum heard voices. You and your mum heard voices from the lake, but your dad didn't hear.
Oh gosh, yeah, it was. I think it was when I was about 16. You're at the age, and you think, I'm not going to go on holiday with my parents much more now. That age, 16, maybe 17. And they had this caravan, and they said, do you want to come with us? And first of all, they went to Wales, and then we went up to Scotland. My dad had he travelled the world and like backpacking type of thing, and getting a job and working in Australia, Canada, New Zealand. He travelled everywhere. Wow. And then he came home, and he was one of them, like, they had a caravanette, and they park up at the side of the road. And that's the type of camping they did, the holidays. And they got this caravan and they said, do you want to come to Scotland? And I said, all right, yeah. So we went up to Scotland and he pulled in next to this lot and it had a stream at the back of it and it flowed underneath the bridge. I can send you the pictures actually, because we've got pictures from there. And it went into the loch underneath this bridge into the loch. And they parked up there. And then the farmer turned up and he said, what are you doing? And I can remember because, when you're that age and you're just embarrassed about your parents because you were a teenager. You're embarrassing me because you've parked and you shouldn't park here. We should have gone to a campsite. And Dad said, well, we was only just going to stop overnight. And this farmer said, well, you'll be gone in the morning anyway. He said, yeah, just stop if you want. So we stopped. We had something to eat and it got dusk. And there was a stream behind us, like I say. We had a quick walk round and had a look. And then I said to Mum, I can hear voices. And she went out. She come over to me at this side of the caravan where I was sat, and she said, I can hear voices as well. And we said to my dad, we can hear voices. He said, that's a stream, that's a stream. That's just a stream making babbling noises. And we said, no, I can hear like voices talking. Clear as anything you could hear voices. And my mum said, yeah, you can. And he said, well, I'm not going having a look. He said, I can't hear anything. I'm not going having a look outside. Well, me and my mum wouldn't go outside and have a look. You know what I mean? It was scary, middle of nowhere in Scotland. So I went to bed, I think, and I just lay there and I was in the bed at the back of the caravan and I can remember listening and I thought, what is it? I don't want to know what it is. Don't come here. Don't come near me. That's why I always think, don't come near me. And about 10 o'clock, it stopped. Nothing. The voices just stopped. But we definitely, 100% heard voices.
And it was coming.
It sounded like men coming from that area of the stream. Whether it was in the stream, next to the stream, there was nobody about. Because we did like peek, but there was nobody about. It was just, there was just a stream behind us, nothing else.
Goodness me. And what did the voices sound like?
It sounded like low whispering in a way. You could hear it, like stage whispering, I suppose you could call it, because we could hear it. It sounded like a number of voices. I'd say male, I'd say, talking and whispering, discussing. And it went on for ages. Must have gone for an hour.
So you're there with your mum again, and she's, at least the two of you could back each other up that, you weren't alone.
Yeah, we both definitely heard that.
Yeah.
We couldn't explain it. Nobody wanted to go out and look with a torch and look. So, we just leave it alone. Don't go near it.
I mean, yeah, it's a bit creepy, but it's nice. I just love the idea that you and your mum are, sharing that experience too.
Yeah.
At least, you're not imagining it.
I know my mum could read tea leaves, but she'd say, it's only for a joke. I'm not doing it. It's only a joke. It doesn't mean anything. I know we've got a relation called Magorty, which is an Irish connection, isn't it? I can't get any further back with them.
Is that your mother's side or your mother's?
Yeah, that's my mum's. Yeah, my mother's side.
So, I mean, she'd experienced this, it sounds like, for her life too. I wonder if that's something that was in the family. And I also wonder whether that's why her father was so religious, or whether it's come through the female line and it was your grandmother
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I don't really know much. All I know is they're a very, very religious family. My grandfather's side, he died when my mum was 19. Um, he was very religious and very, very strict.
And your grandmother never talked about any of these matters aside
I
from,
didn't meet her. I didn't meet her because she died before I was born.
yeah,
So
yeah,
I never met her. I
yeah.
can only know my mum would say, she was a little bit secretive, my mum, about things. And she'd say, don't talk about this, don't talk about that. You'd ask her questions about your family. No, no, why do you want to know? Why do you want to know? I don't know why. I don't know why. I've looked back and I don't see anything. Nobody's been burned as a witch as far as I know.
This is it. I think people just were reluctant to talk about anything in those days. It's a shame, isn't it? Because
Yeah,
you miss a lot of the. I'm sure it wasn't always like that either, but you miss a lot of the family stories and the wisdom and traditions passing down. But it's interesting that your mum had to kind of ridicule her own mediumship
yeah.
in order for her, because it sounds like she enjoyed doing it. Otherwise, she wouldn't have continued. But in
All
order,
her friends used to, they used to bring their own tea round. At the one time when there was tea was
yeah.
shortage or whatever, or rationed, and they used to bring tea round, and she'd read the tea leaves. But she'd say, "Oh, it's only so many things what people think about. So it's only a joke. Don't, you know what I mean? It's nothing. It's not serious."
I love that because she's kind of rebelling against her father's sort of religious authority there as well, but doing it in a way that she can continue to do that.
Yeah.
She didn't do that in front of him. If he wouldn't even let cards in the house, and of course that would
No.
be him thinking, well, even cards you can use as for divination, can't you? But I just love that she, nevertheless, despite her own fears about being called bonkers, and despite the external religious authority of her father, she still found a way in which to enjoy, exercising those mediumship skills. That shows a real force of character that I admire.
Yeah.
So your mum had noticed that pipe smoke too. So what did she?
What happened was when they first moved into the house, they kept getting the pipe smoke smell a lot. And she told me, this is what she told me, but she only told me later on. She
Yeah.
didn't tell me at the time. She didn't tell me I was about 15. And she said, kept getting the smell and they kept using pipe smoke. And she told her mum, and her mum said, have a look through the house and see if you can see any personal items of the last owner. And if there is, burn it. And she said, she looked everywhere. She said, I can't see anything. And it still kept happening. And eventually she found like an old hat on top of, I don't know, a cupboard. And she burnt that hat. And she said she never saw anything afterwards. Nothing like it was anyway.
Wow. Okay. So so that fixed it. So you mentioned to me that your mum, when you were little, didn't like you wearing green.
She didn't know. She never, I never noticed I didn't wear green. She used to tell me, if I put something on inside out,
Mm.
all the wrong way around or anything, she can't change that now. You have to leave it till the end of the day
Oh,
because it's bad luck to change it. And that was one thing she used to say, what I remembered. And when I got to, when you get to about 15, you want your own clothes and you're picking your own stuff out. I remember getting a green jumper. And it was like, why are you wearing green? You can't wear green. Said, why not? She's unlucky. She didn't know what to say. It's unlucky. It's unlucky. You can't wear green. I said, look, I like green. I like green. It's a nice colour. It suits me. No, you can't wear green. No. And I have heard that some say it offends the fae. And I've heard some people say, don't dress your children in it or you'll attract them.
yeah. I mean, that's a really well known belief about not wearing green because it can offend the fairies, which the idea is that, that's their colour and that it's kind of bordering on their territory, or if you dress your child in it, it's kind of an invitation to the fairies But I wonder where that came from then. So maybe that also came down the line from this relative, or at least.
Yeah, I don't know. I've not got a clue.
And I mean, they could have, and I suppose, they could have done anything they wanted after they won the pools, but she did choose to take those chimney breasts out. Do you think that
they didn't win tons of money? They didn't win like loads. They won enough to, when you want to do bits to your house. I'd say it was like that amount.
Yeah, but it's interesting that she did take them out, because do you think that she might have been aware that there was something there? I mean, it sounds like she waited till you were 15 and old enough perhaps not to be too scared by the fact that there was some kind of presence in the house that she was aware of too, and that you were correct about the old man being in the house. And I just wonder if she'd known about if anything was in that chimney breast, she wouldn't have let on, especially at that age.
She might not have done. She'd probably try and protect me by saying, "You're dreaming," hoping it would go away.
But actually, she did stop it by removing the chimney breasts.
Mm. Yeah.
Sounds like you've had a number of experiences in later life.
I didn't count her fairies as fairies. I just didn't think about it. But it seems to be always spooky things what happened to me. Seeing things or hearing things. And then when we went to live in Anglesey, there was a lot of things going on there.
This section is available for all members of the Curious Crew who support on Patreon. Join us there for this and more bonus content. Patreon.com/the Modern Fairy Sightings Podcast. I'm so glad you did email me.
Yeah, thank you for talking, Jo.
Thank you.
I appreciate you listening. Yeah. It's lovely meeting you. And you know something, Jo? Because of you, I've actually booked to do Reiki level 1.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't, after that Hat Man experience, I closed myself off and I didn't want to look at anything or think of anything.
Yeah.
It's only recently, probably since I had that double pneumonia and almost give up, if you know what I mean, that I thought, right, I'm going to do something. Time to
This felt like a very important share, as I'm sure you'll agree. I'm interested in the fact that our guest's mother had also seen a little man, and that her grandmother was able to pass on advice for ridding the house of a spirit, and yet both of these older generations tried to suppress the reality of these experiences for the little girl, in turn. I'm left wondering, at what point did it become unacceptable to speak of these encounters and this awareness of the other? I wonder whether it was an external authority, like religion or societal pressure, which silences people, or if it is as a result of an experience which took place in the family at some point that struck fear into that member of the family and set a precedence for advising distance from these beings and spiritual manifestations. The landscape in which our guest lived was very familiar, not only to her, but to her ancestors. It is rare these days that a family lives more than a couple of generations at the same location. But before industrialization, when we were all separated from each other and the land, it was the norm for generations of one family to be interweaved with the local environment and for the land and the people to have a bearing on each other's history. In some ways, you can understand how one would care for the other and how deep these relationships could be. It's heartbreaking to think of what we have lost. The place itself was at the centre of a great deal of hotspots, next to a railway, between two reservoirs, at a crossroads and close to mines. We don't know why exactly these places tend to attract activity, whether they disrupt energy lines in the landscape, for example train lines and man-made reservoirs, or whether the rail lines themselves cause some kind of energy build-up. But you only have to look at any ongoing paranormal research and you'll find dozens of encounters along railways, canals, and other waterways, including ghosts, cryptids, and, as we've heard previously on this podcast, otherworldly beings. We can understand how a child would call these beings puppets. She knows they aren't animals, and puppets suggest something that doesn't seem quite real, but has somehow come alive. As we've seen before in other stories and folklore, the hearth presents an entrance and exit point to a house, and it's a threshold. In the 17th century, people would conceal witch bottles and other objects in their attics, inside their hearths, and under floorboards, and this was to protect themselves from evil spirits and witchcraft. The glass or earthenware bottles, which might contain bodily fluids like urine, nail clippings, hair, bent pins, or thorns, these were powerful symbolic items which would trap the otherworldly intruder in the bottle as they passed through the threshold. If you're interested in finding more about the history of witch bottles, I recommend looking into the Concealed Revealed project, which folklorist Dr. Kerry Holbrook undertook, and I will link to that in the notes. For me, the most disturbing aspect of this encounter is the man that appears and neglects to help the little girl. I would like to understand more about this figure. In the full-length episode, our guest describes a later Hatman experience as an adult, but she is adamant that this was a very different sort of being to the man she saw as a child. He seems pale, and she felt sure he was a person at the time. To me, it seems as if this person was a spirit, and that in itself is interesting. In reported encounters and in fairy lore, fairies are often accompanied by the recently departed, particularly in stories about fairy captives, where the abducted person is warned or helped to escape by a person whom they recognize in fairyland, who had recently died. But in this case, no help is forthcoming. Who and what was this being? The strange song is also very unsettling. There's something about the repetitive nature and the way it speeds up to an ever-increasing frequency that feels powerful, and somehow the use of that is eerily familiar. Singing is a recognisable motif in folklore, and in the medieval chronicles, Wild Edric is said to have been enchanted by his future wife when she and her fairy sisters surrounded him in a forest, singing a soft, low song whose words he could not understand. Music can transport us, that we all agree, and for those of us who've experienced it, chanting moves us to an altered state. Was our guest purposefully shifted into an altered state? And if so, for what purpose? She names the strange atmosphere as if the world held its breath and the sense that everything goes tight. An example of the strange sort of phenomena which Jenny Randalls terms the Oz factor, it brings to mind a potential shift from one atmosphere of reality to another. These beings are peering at her from their own world. Did they use the chant to cross that threshold, or to affect our guest in some way? As I've said previously, I don't think these childhood encounters are particularly unusual. I think many of us can remember strange happenings which we weren't able to make sense of as a child. And rather than all of these being dreams, which a few may be, of course, the similarity of strangeness within these experiences and the vivid nature of the meeting with these beings, to me, suggests that there is more to this world than we are currently generally at ease with discussing. As we push closer to our own threshold at this time, though, perhaps we will begin to understand more of what lies behind that membrane between our world and theirs, and we are living in a thin time. Although it feels unstable, what may steady us is remembering and recognizing the love that exists between us as human beings. It's likely that as we continue to see the old world fall, we will be encouraged to fall to fear ourselves. But what use are we to each other and to the world if we make ourselves powerless in the face of fear? Far better to stand together and push through to a better world. So, find your community, do what you love, and be who you truly are. We all came here to do something at this time, and deep inside, you know what that is. Stay connected, stay together, and remain curious.